Hi, welcome to the Badass Breastfeeding Podcast. This is Dianne, your lactation consultant.
And I'm Abby, the Badass Breastfeeder, and today's episode is brought to you by Simple Wishes. Simple Wishes offers hands-free pumping and nursing bras featuring a patented dual-function nursing clasp. And today's episode is also brought to you by our new sponsor, Zomi. Zomi makes breast pumps approved by lactation consultants and loved by moms. And we will hear more about our sponsors later, but you can head to badassbreastfeedingpodcast.com and check out our sponsor page and see if you need anything. See if you can give anybody there your business because they make this podcast possible. And while you're there, you can scroll down and enter your email address and you'll get episodes sent straight to your inbox every Monday and Wednesday. And now Dianne has our review of the week.
And it also comes from our iTunes. So thank you so much for putting this up for us. From Bree LDC, I started listening while pregnant because I wanted to be more prepared for our afterbirth journey. They answer questions that I didn't even know I had. Thank you, ladies, for such a variety of topics that you cover. I love listening, re-listening, and binging to this podcast. I do have a question about milk trays and storage, milk storage. We love them, but are wondering what the best way to store milk would be since mixing milk from different days isn't ideal. We do have info on this, like milk pooling. From one of our other podcasts from back in the summer. So I will link it in the show notes, but you can mix milk. Like a lot of people say don't mix it, but there's
I thought that the CDC or somebody came out saying that they changed their thing about that.
Yeah. Like it doesn't, the milk guidelines have kind of come from like food storage guidelines. Like that's kind of what it's based off of. And we really shouldn't be treating human milk like food. Like it is food, yes, but we shouldn't be treating it like, like that steak that's in your freezer. Like it shouldn't be treated the same way. You can mix milk. They used to say you couldn't mix milk, but you can mix milk. It's perfectly fine. Like nothing's going to child isn't going to explode or anything like that. It's totally okay. If you need to mix milk, you can mix milk. Or if you don't feel comfortable doing that, you could just like fill in your milk tray as you have milk. Cause it's just, the little milk things. You don't have to fill in the whole tray with one pumping session. You know what I mean? Like you can fill it in with different days of milk and stuff like that. But I will link that episode because that episode, and I can't remember exactly when it was in August of 2021. So there is some like the research articles and things like that talk about milk pooling are part of that episode. So I'm going to link that episode. That way you can go to that episode if you haven't listened to it yet, or at least look at the research articles about it, about pooling milk, and you can feel more comfortable with it. But that's it. And thank you so much for putting that on iTunes for us. We'd love to hear your reviews and the things you like, and throw a question in there if you want to. If it's something easy, we can answer super quick before we start our episodes. We love to do that. Or you can send us an email at badassbreastfeedingpodcast@gmail.com. And if you can't put it on iTunes, that you can always do it that way too. So thank you very much. And we've got another controversial topic today.
I know, we're on a roll. Last week was marijuana. Now we're talking about Cry It Out.
We're on a roll.
We are just like really ready to butt heads with people.
Yes. So I have to, because I found this to be kind of funny. Abby had a book with all this information that she wanted to share with me. So she took all these pictures of all the chapters, all the pages in the chapters, and sends it to me. And I was like, started reading it through through text. I'm like, I would rather print it out so I can like mess with it or whatever. And then I'm like, oh my God, there's like 20 pages here. So I go, what book is this out of? Because then I'm like, well, maybe I could like Google it and find it, whatever. Because what book is this out of? And she sends me the name of the book, sends me a picture of the cover of the book. And I ended up having the book. Not only do I have the book, it's signed by the author.
Oh.
Like I actually, so I must have bought it like at a conference or whatever.
Yeah.
And I was like, so I went through it. I'm like, oh my God, I have this. Not only do I have it, it's a signed copy, which I find.
Yeah. So the book is The Science of Mother-Infant Sleep. It's edited by Wendy Middlemiss, PhD, and Kathleen Kendall Tackett, PhD, IBCLC, FAPA. But it is a collection of a bunch of different articles of contributors, including Tracy Castles, who's been a friend of the podcast. But there is a section on just Cry It Out. And of course, there's a million places that you can get information on Cry It Out. You can even get information on why Cry It Out is awesome. And spoiler alert, that won't be our perspective today.
I was just going to say that.
This is just the book that I had, and noticed that there was some information in here, and so we'll use some of the information, and we'll also just have a conversation about it.
What I love, because I was, I was reading the chapters that Abby specifically had pointed out. What I noticed about this and what I really liked about it was that it wasn't saying, oh, you shouldn't do this, blah, blah, blah. It didn't even really talk about sleep necessarily. It was more talking about how the stressors of crying and leaving your child to cry, the science behind how those stressors are dangerous.
To the developing brain and to the developing psychology of a child, yeah.
And I thought that was... They weren't like, oh, this is, Tara, you can't cry it out. You shouldn't be doing it. But it was more of like, this is why it's important for us to have this information.
Well, this is what science does, right?
Right.
It doesn't tell us one way or the other. It's like, here is the information. Here is information.
Yeah, it wasn't even talking about sleep. It was like, it was necessarily, it was about the science of what that, what the crying and what the stress of.
Yes,
on your baby. Like, it's amazing. So that's what, we're going to be talking about that today too.
And what I liked about the very beginning is that, because we had this conversation with Rebecca Meeke when she was here, she was talking about the origins of this kind of cry it out and leaving babies to cry. And like, where did that come from? Like, how did we get this? And the first part of this, I want to read because it's great. And it really feel like it really lends just like amazing perspective. And so it says, letting babies cry it out is an idea that has been around since at least the 1880s, when the field of medicine was in a hullabaloo about germs and transmitting infection, and so took to the notion that babies should rarely be touched. In the 20th century, behaviorist John Watson, in 1928, interested in making psychology a hard science, took up the crusade against affection as president of the American Psychological Association. He applied the mechanistic. That's the word. He applied the mechanistic paradigm of behaviorism to child rearing, warning about the dangers of too much mother love. The 20th century was a time when men of science were assumed to know better than mothers, grandmothers, and families, sounds familiar, about how to raise a child. Too much kindness to a baby would result in a whiny, dependent, failed human being. Funny how the experts, in quotes, got away with this with no evidence to back it up. Instead, there is evidence all around then and now showing the opposite to be true. A government pamphlet from the time recommended that mothering meant holding the baby quietly in tranquility-inducing positions, and that the mother should stop immediately if her arms feel tired because the baby is never to inconvenience the adult. Babies older than 6 months should be taught to sit silently in the crib, otherwise he might need to be constantly watched and entertained by a mother, a serious waste of time.
This is unbelievably ridiculous. I was listening
so much of this is so true still today.
Yeah. I think it was on a Tracy Castles podcast, actually, where they talked about this. They talked about that whole, it came from not holding the baby because of germs. Like that's, because people are like, where did this whole concept come from? And it's like,
well, that makes sense to me.
I mean, germy, like you can't touch them.
Like, well, or the adults are going to pass the germs to the baby.
Yeah.
Which way? I don't know which one. I assumed it was that.
I don't know, man.
That they shouldn't touch. Yeah. So in the 1880s, when the field of medicine was in a hullabaloo about germs and transmitting infection, and so took to the notion that babies should rarely be touched. Don't touch the baby because you might pass an infection to them. I think we know now is not true, but I can also understand that, like, oh, okay, we need to be careful in that way. But it really morphed into this, like, you know, it's really better for them if they don't inconvenience the parent, and, you know, they need to, you know, you need to just be withholding, you know, I mean, like, too much mother love.
Coming from a man.
Yes, from the president of the American Psychological Association. He was on a crusade against affection.
Like, it just,
he needed to be held more, maybe. I don't know.
Right. I can't.
Yeah. So I like to point out, whenever I talk about cried out, I like to talk about what is cried out and what isn't cried out.
Mhm.
Because people are like, oh my God, my baby sleeps in the other room. Am I doing cry it out? Well, is your baby crying in the other room and you're not responding? Because it's different if your family, it works better for your family that your baby sleeps in a crib in another room. That works for some people. And so, but when your baby cries, do you go to them? Or are you systematically and like intentionally leaving them to cry and not answering their cries so that they can, like, quote unquote, learn to sleep? That's cry it out.
Mm-hmm.
And it's also not cry it out if you are about to lose your shit and you need to separate yourself from a upset child who's, you know, who you need to separate yourself from, or you might shake them or something. You know, you need to. I have a friend who had a baby. We were really young. I know people have babies when they're like 20, but like, I mean, I'm not a good example of like how people should be when they're 20, but like, I can't even imagine. So she was like, the baby was crying and crying and crying and crying and wouldn't stop. She called her mom and she was like, he won't stop crying. And she was all upset. And the mom was like, take him, put him in his crib and close the door. Like, she was doing a crisis intervention. She was like, she's so upset. She's like losing her mind. You need to separate yourself and go calm down somewhere. That's not cry it out. That's just being safe.
Right.
Cry it out is like when you are intentionally leaving your baby to cry, not answering the cries because you're trying to teach them some level of independence.
It is also not cry it out if you're trying to establish some boundaries, maybe like, you know, breastfeeding at night boundaries or like sleep, whatever your boundary is, and your baby is fighting against that, and you're offering a different kind of consoling instead of what they want. Does that make sense?
Yes. If you are there, it is not cry it out.
Right. If you are consoling them in another way, yes, it is not cry it out.
Yeah.
It is
if
not.
You are just like, I'm done breastfeeding, I'm never going to breastfeed again, and you just don't do it ever again, I don't recommend doing it that way, but that's not cry it out because you're still holding your baby, right? Yeah, cry it out is them crying in a room alone and you not responding.
I can't remember which chapter it was. I don't know, maybe you noted it, said that small instances of babies crying, like the situation of put him in his crib, walk away, close the door, walk away. Yes, he's crying, but it's an intervention, right? Like, that is not damaging. It's happening here and there. That's not damaging.
No, that's going to happen to all babies. All babies are going to get stressed sometimes, so we just can't avoid that.
Right. This is
but
a totally different thing.
They shouldn't be stressed all the time.
Yeah.
And not having people respond to them.
When I was reading this the other day, as I was like sitting on the couch reading it, and my daughter came home from work and she came over to give me a kiss and she's like, "What are you doing?" And I was telling her about it. Like, I'm reading this about crying, you know, letting your baby cry to like teach them how to, you know, sleep or teach them how to whatever, behave, whatever it is. And she just kind of looked at me. She goes, "What?" And I'm like, "Yeah, like, so this is what happens sometimes." And she was like, "What is wrong with people?" You know, and I'm just like, and I told her I knew somebody that I had worked with. She was a mother baby nurse when I was a lactation consultant at the hospital. And she was working with a sleep consultant for her baby, who was about 9 months at the time, and putting this on putting the whole thing on social media. So, you know, it was all there for everybody to see. And saying, you know, I need to get some sleep. I'm not sleeping because the baby is up constantly. So I'm working with a sleep consultant who did the whole let her cry, whatever. And she was posting on Facebook how hard it was for her to sit there. Oh, it's been 25 minutes now. The baby's still screaming. She screamed so much that she threw up. Like it's just,
Yeah.
and it's so hard for me to listen to, but they said, I got to leave her. We got to, you have to just let her do it and blah, blah, blah. And all that. And I'm like, oh my gosh. And people are like, on Facebook, oh yeah, good for you. It's stay strong, blah. It's like, oh my, somebody go pick up that baby.
I know. I remember this in parent groups early on as well. People posting how upset they were that they were, they had to listen to their baby cry, and how, you're wired to be upset by that sound for a reason. It's supposed to upset you. It's supposed to drive you to comfort the baby. And people are like, how do I do this? I'm so upset. I don't know, what to do. And people are suffering. Everyone is suffering. Nobody is happy. And doctors are recommending this all the time too. I mean, this is why people are doing it, because their doctor's telling them to. People don't just do it because they're like, yay, I want to listen to my baby cry. Nobody's happy about it.
Right.
I remember.
Whereby it doesn't cause, I've heard doctors say this. It does not cause brain problems. There is no long-term effect of letting your baby cry.
Let's just get into this. So the problem with letting babies be upset for long periods of time is,
we should maybe get into it after we do a break.
Holy shit. Okay.
I know. So stay tuned, because we're going to
We'll be right back.
Hit the heavy stuff.
Today's episode is brought to you by Zomi, breast pumps approved by lactation consultants and loved by moms. Zomi's unique alternating mode design works with you to make expressing breast milk as comfortable and easy as possible. Their pumps have hospital-grade strength, are portable, BPA-free, and best of all, covered by all insurances. The new Zomi Z2 features 3 different pumping styles, which you can further tailor for comfort: massage, expression, and 2-phase mode, expression and massage. The Zomi Z2 is a closed system pump that prevents milk from backing up in the tubing. It also comes with a lithium battery and a micro USB port with cable for connecting to a power source, ideal for working and traveling. Zomi understands how crucial breastfeeding and pumping are to motherhood, so they made it easier with their double electric breast pumps. Check out Zomi at ZOMEE.com and check with your insurance. And today's episode is also brought to you by Simple Wishes. Simple Wishes offers hands-free pumping and nursing bras featuring a patented dual-function nursing clasp to easily switch between nursing and pumping, and buttery soft, light-as-air fabrics for 24/7 comfort. Simply undo the lower clasp and slide your pump flange into the hidden pump support liner for a hands-free pumping experience. Undo the upper clasp for easy access for breastfeeding. Simple Wishes bras are smooth with no lumps that show under your shirt. The bras are designed to fit every shape of breast so that you don't need to feel uncomfortable while you are trying to pump or enjoy a nursing session with your baby. No one wants to waste their money on cheap products that don't last. Simple Wishes has you covered for your entire journey. You can check out every style of bra at simplewishes.com and use code BADASS30 for 30% off of your purchase. And Today's sponsors and their promo codes can be found at badassbreastfeedingpodcast.com. And also at badassbreastfeedingpodcast.com, you can find all of our breastfeeding resources, all of our other episodes, and information about scheduling your very own one-on-one online lactation consultation with Dianne.
All right, so let's get into the nitty-gritty.
Let's talk about how babies' brains die. Sorry. So when a baby...
That's not like dark and depressing.
No, here.
There.
So what does Criadel actually do? So neurons die. When the baby is stressed, the toxic hormone cortisol is released. It's a neuron killer. A full-term baby, 40 to 42 weeks, with only 25% of its brain developed, is undergoing rapid brain growth. The brain grows on average 3 times as large by the end of the first year. Who knows what neurons are not being connected or being wiped out during times of extreme stress? What deficits might show up years later from such regular distressful experiences? That was not maybe the greatest paragraph to read. So cortisol levels, your baby's upset. Here, Real simple. Your baby's upset. Cortisol levels go up. Cortisol is not good for their brain. End of story.
Mm-hmm.
Cortisol does damage to the brain when it's around for long periods of time. And that's it. That should be all we need to know.
Right.
The end of the story. Goodbye.
One of the other important things I think that should be noted is that we have learned that when we leave babies to cry it out, to train them to sleep, after, a couple of days of this and your baby stops notifying you, right? They stop the crying and you're thinking, okay, they're sleeping great now. That's not necessarily true. They're just not calling for you anymore because you're not responsive to them. So
they have learned that crying doesn't work because nobody comes.
Right.
And so they withdraw.
Doesn't mean that they're sleeping better, because they are not. And the research that they've done with this show that those babies still wake as frequently as before. They're just not, you don't know it because they've written you off, basically. They're like, nobody's coming for me. And that's the message that you're sending to them when you don't respond to them. They know they think that you're not coming for them, which you're not, which is why they were crying. I mean, that's the whole basis of Cry It Out. You let them cry until they figure out till they figure it out for themselves. They're babies. They're not supposed to figure it out for themselves.
No, and they don't. They actually figure things out through your responsiveness to them.
Mm-hmm.
People think that if they don't respond to their babies, that they will then learn to self-soothe. They actually learn to self-soothe and self-regulate by you co-regulating and soothing them. That's how they develop those skills. They don't just learn it on their own in the room by themselves. People think that if you're helping them to soothe them, that they're not learning it themselves. That's not true. That's actually how they learn it themselves.
Mm-hmm.
That is how they learn it themselves, by you being there and soothing them.
So children that have come out of this Cry It Out, right? They do cry it out as babies. Now they're children. And they don't necessarily handle things as well.
Yeah, right. These high levels of cortisol, related to stressful experiences consistently throughout babyhood have been linked to all kinds of, anxiety, depression, psychological, emotional problems later in life.
Of course, that didn't come from the director of psychology or whatever it was that we were reading from earlier.
It didn't.
I was years ago part of this this safe sleep group, which was a little kind of crazy, but there was a woman on the safe sleep thing that was so fearful of babies and sleep. And her mission was, to make sure everybody knew that babies could die while they're sleeping and, all this stuff, and just a lot of fear mongering behind it. And there was one time where she was like, I wish we could just put all the babies in a bubble and not touch them. And I'm like, and then
no.
And I go, you're creating a society of psychopaths.
Right.
Like, you can't do that. They need that human contact with you. They need to know that they are safe. They need that to thrive.
Yeah. So the thing about mammals, right? So we're mammals. One of the characteristics of mammals is that they nurse their young. And so proximity to the nursing parent is obvious. We're not like some species of shark. Jack was actually helping me with this. I was like, Jack, how we care for our young, or they're like, what animals don't, He's like, well, some species of sharks don't. They just go somewhere. They either lay eggs or they give birth to even live young and then leave. And the babies just, I don't know, grow up and become sharks. But that's fine for them. We are not sharks.
Mm-mm.
We are mammals who nurse our young. And by the way, this is a breastfeeding podcast. Forgot to talk about breastfeeding for 25 minutes. crying out and breastfeeding like really don't go really well together.
Mm-mm.
Because for many reasons, it's really hard to nurse an upset child. And you can't nurse on demand if you are, for large parts of the day, not responding to your child.
Sleep training as a whole and breastfeeding don't really go well together. And I see this, I'm not going to say all the time, but I do see it. I mean, it's happened very recently too, where people say, oh, the pediatrician said my baby's not gaining well, or my milk supply is dropped. And then it'll come out, oh yeah, we did some sleep training. So now the baby's sleeping longer stretches. Well, that's why they're not gaining weight. And that's why your milk supply is dropped, because babies are being sleep trained, and that does not mix well with breastfeeding. So as hard as it is, and this is the problem with our society, right? Because people are like, yes, breastfeed. We want you to breastfeed. And then they say, but don't sleep with your baby,
right?
Because that's really dangerous. So we don't want you to do that, but we want you to breastfeed. And then parents are like, I'm a zombie. I'm not getting any sleep. I need to sleep train my baby. And they're sleep like young, like 3-4 months, sleep training babies so that they can get some sleep. So the parent themselves can get some sleep.
So they can go to work.
But now milk supply is dropping and babies aren't gaining well because they're not breastfeeding when they it just becomes this vicious cycle, which ends up destroying the breastfeeding relationship. That's what ends up suffering, is the breastfeeding relationship. Because then you end up supplementing and now milk supply is dropping and the baby's not, it happens all the time.
Mm-hmm.
We are not helping parents through this at all.
Society is to blame. It's not parents that are choosing to cry it out, because people choose cry it out either because they're told to or because they're desperate. Because we have they actually talk about this in one of these chapters too, about how we have completely isolated people, separated people from, the extended family, which is what has historically helped parents, manage and, to raise a baby. Well, it takes a village, right? I mean, that's that's like a thing that we say. Here it is. The cry it out approach seems to have arisen as a solution to the dissolution of extended family life in the 20th century. And so with, separating people from their, extended families by, work really becoming the focus, we've become isolated, raising our babies by ourselves, and we're desperate for solutions to get sleep so that we can go back to work, so that we can make the machine work.
And it's all at the detriment of our children.
Yeah. And I found a better thing about this. Exposure to chronic stress seems to be associated with physical disorders, for example, cardiovascular disease and cancer, and also psychological disorders such as depression and anxiety. And exposure to high amounts of cortisol that is released in response to stressors has been shown to result in damage to the hippocampus, which is involved in learning and memory, and the amygdala, involved in processing of emotions.
Mm-hmm. It's all important stuff that you're...
The hippocampus and the amygdala, by the way, are really important.
They are really important.
I can't imagine. I don't know. I feel like hopefully we're preaching to the choir today, because I doubt that anybody listening to this is. But this is so you can help kind of a lot of this stuff you guys know, over the years, if you've been listening, or you learned, and you go out there and you tell people and you teach people and you educate people. So.
But I also want people to know, because like we say, you are hardwired to respond to your baby. So if you are responding, these are the good things you're doing. Okay, you're responding to your baby, but this is why it's so important that you're doing that. And a lot of people, I never knew the science behind it.
Right.
Really,
it's not just
this.
Right. It's not just oh, well, it's just a lifestyle choice. I'm just choosing to respond to my baby, just like I choose to be vegetarian.
Mm-hmm.
No, it's not. It's a little different. This is actually the way that your baby has been designed. You and your baby are designed to interact for like optimal health in life.
And I mean, like, knowing
it's
me,
not lifestyle, it's science.
Right. And I feel really good after reading this stuff and knowing like the stuff that I know. And of course I've, been knowing this for a long time, but I didn't know it when I was parenting my babies. When they were babies, I didn't know. I just responded to them as needed, because that's just kind of like, okay, this is what you do, right? You're hardwired to respond to your babies. So that's what I did. And now reading, the more I learn about it, the more I know how much it impacts them psychologically and physically when you do not respond to them. Now I'm like, oh God, I did a good thing. And people might be telling, oh, don't go running. Every little thing that they, every time they cry, don't go running to pick them up. You're going to spoil them, blah, 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 this crap. Like, no, you're doing the opposite.
You can't spoil a baby.
No, you cannot.
You can spoil a toddler if you give them a cookie every time that they have a tantrum. But not a baby.
No. I had some, like, a family not too long ago asked me about this. About the picking up and spoiling. Their baby is 3 weeks old. 3 weeks old. And they were like, but is it like if we pick them up and hold them too much, is that going to cause a problem? And I'm like, no. Because they were like talking about like the evening cluster feeding and, when you're newborns and they're fussy and they need, well, if we just keep picking him out, like, isn't he going to learn that that's what happens? Yes. And I was like, no.
Yes, he is going to learn that's what happens. And that's what you want.
I was like, you have to respond to him. You have to. And they're like, so what and the dad was funny because he was like, okay, let me get this straight. So what you're saying is the more I pick him up, the better that is. And I said, yes. The more he will learn how to be self-sufficient, the more you respond to him. Okay. All right. Then that's what I'll do. I'm not even kidding. That was our conversation for a 3-week-old. Like, how can our society even fathom that a 3-week-old baby should be left to figure his own shit out? I don't understand that. And it's not because I work in this field. It's like, I legit don't get it. Like, they're 3 weeks old. Their babies' brains are ridiculously immature. They do not have the ability to figure their own shit out.
Yeah, we've talked about this in other episodes that we are some of the most immature babies upon birth. Like, we give birth the earliest. Like a horse gives birth and then they like stand up and walk around.
Elephants, yeah.
Like, but humans are so, as we were thousands of years ago, like hunched over, and we could bear babies later. But as we became more upright and the birth canal became narrower and smaller because now we're upright more, we have given birth earlier. And so the human babies are some of the absolute most immature upon birth. There is no reason to think that you're spoiling or somehow doing something wrong by picking a baby up too much. It's just so weird.
I know. It can't happen. So that's a little bit of the science behind
I want to end with this paragraph because the very last paragraph of this chapter of this book is really awesome.
Okay.
Ultimately, this seems designed to not only reduce one's reliance on others, but can have the unintended consequences of our becoming completely alienated from those others. When we have what seems like an ever-increasing incidence of lone and very lonely people perpetuating acts of violence against others, it might be that we should, as a culture, start asking the question as to whether the costs of our preferred child-rearing strategies might be too high.
I did read that. It was amazing. It's amazing. Way to leave
Look around at all the fucked up people around you. And let's just think for a minute, like, maybe why don't we try something else? Why don't we just try something else? Let's just try it. Mm-hmm. We'll just try it and see what happens.
That's a great way to end it.
Yeah, it's pretty bad right now.
Yeah.
So thanks for listening.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.